It was supposed to be a simple detour. The snowstorm rolled in faster than forecasted, swallowing the road in a suffocating sheet of white. My headlights barely pierced the flurries, casting ghostly shadows across the twisting forest road. I was just trying to get home after visiting my aunt in the neighboring town, but the GPS rerouted me through the old timber route when the main highway closed. I shouldn't have followed it. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but turning back wasn't an option. The snow had already buried the tire tracks behind me. The cold started seeping into my bones. The dashboard heater coughed weakly, and the gas meter dipped lower than I remembered. I told myself I could tough it out for another hour, maybe two. But when the engine sputtered and gave a pathetic choke before dying completely, I knew I was in trouble. I sat there for a moment in the silence, wrapped in layers that felt suddenly paper thin. The forest outside didn't make a sound. Not a branch creaked, not a bird cried. It was as though the snow had smothered the world. Then I saw the light. It was faint at first, a dull yellow glow between the trees ahead, almost like a lantern swaying in the distance. I rubbed my eyes, half convinced I was seeing things. But there it was again, flickering, soft and steady. A cabin? I hesitated, but the cold was already biting my fingers through my gloves. I stuffed my essentials into a backpack and trudged toward the light, each footstep crunching deep in the snow. My legs burned. My breath fogged the air in thick puffs. But the closer I got, the more solid it became. It was a small cabin tucked between a crescent of pine trees, its wooden frame aged but upright. A chimney piped out slow tendrils of smoke. The porch light buzzed dimly. I expected it to be locked or abandoned, but when I knocked on the door, it creaked open by itself. The warmth hit me immediately. Inside, the fireplace crackled with life. A thick throw rug sat beneath a low wooden table. Two chairs faced the hearth. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" But no answer came. That's when I noticed something odd. There were no footprints inside, no shoes by the door, no dishes in the sink, no clutter, nothing to suggest anyone had lived there in weeks. Yet the fire was roaring. A pot of tea steamed gently on the stove, and there was only one mug beside it, like someone was expecting a guest. I told myself someone must have just left and would be back soon. Maybe a local hunter, maybe a ranger, maybe I was lucky. I removed my boots, set my wet coat by the fire, and sat down with the tea. It was hot, perfectly sweet, perfectly spiced. And then the door closed by itself. I didn't hear it at first, the creaking wood, the faint latch clicking shut. But when I turned around, it was sealed, locked. I walked to it, tried the handle. It didn't budge. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the wind, that the old cabin had creaky hinges. But then I looked outside through the frosted window and saw nothing but darkness. The trees were gone, the snow was gone. There was only black, as if the world outside had vanished. The fireplace flickered suddenly, the flames rising high with a gust of wind. Though none blew, shadows danced wildly across the walls. One shadow didn't move like the others. It stood between the chairs, tall and motionless. I froze. It wasn't my shadow. It wasn't cast by any object I could see, but it stood there like something watching me, or waiting. The fire dimmed abruptly. The cabin grew colder, the warmth retreating, as though sucked into the walls. I backed away, heart pounding, eyes wide. Then I heard the whispering. It came from behind the walls, faint, urgent, rhythmic, a chorus of murmurs, all layered atop one another, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel their weight: sadness, anger, hunger. I turned toward the door again, yanking hard, desperate. It still wouldn't open. My breath came in shallow gasps. The whispering grew louder, and then the voices said my name. Not once, not a whisper, but 100 overlapping voices in tones that mimicked old teachers, childhood friends, even my mother's voice, all saying my name in perfect, hollow unison. I staggered back, my spine hitting the wall. The rug beneath me pulsed, not visually but physically, like something was breathing underneath it. I stepped off it quickly and pulled the rug aside. Beneath it was a hatch, wooden, sealed shut with rusted nails. But as I stared at it, I saw movement between the cracks, something pale, something writhing, something trying to push through. I bolted to the other side of the cabin, searching for a window, a weapon, anything. But the windows wouldn't break. The chairs wouldn't budge. Even the mug I drank from earlier had vanished. The fire burned low now, casting dim orange light across the room. Then I saw the photographs. They weren't there before. Now they were pinned all around the walls, black and white portraits of people I didn't recognize, all frozen in moments of terror, eyes wide, mouths open. Some were mid-scream. Others looked like they died frozen solid. And in the center of each photo was something else, something blurred, something tall and faceless, standing just behind them. It was the shadow, always watching, always behind. And then I saw the last photo. It was of me, taken from the corner of the room, me sitting by the fire, me sipping the tea, me unaware. My skin went ice cold. I didn't hear the hatch open. I only heard the whispering stop. And then the footsteps, soft at first, slow, wet. Something was coming up from beneath the floor. I turned to the door again and screamed, slamming into it with all my strength. Still nothing. I banged and screamed until my voice cracked, until my fists were bloody. Then the door clicked open. I stumbled into the snow, gasping, running, not looking back, not even once. I don't remember how far I ran, only that I collapsed somewhere near the road and a snowplow driver found me at sunrise. They said there was no cabin, no structure in those, no tracks except mine. But I know what I saw. I still have the frost-burned scars on my fingers. I still wake up sweating, hearing my name whispered in my ear. And sometime, late at night, I find photographs on my floor that I never took, each one a little closer than the last. I used to think winter nights were peaceful, quiet, slow, a blanket of calm over the chaos of the world. That changed the night I took the job at the Ridgeway Rest Lodge. It was a seasonal gig, nothing special, just a caretaker position during the off-season, while the owners were away. Easy money, they said. I'd stay in the caretaker's cabin behind the main lodge, do routine checks, keep the pipes from freezing, make sure the generator kept running. A few weeks alone in a beautiful, remote mountain resort, buried under snow. I thought it sounded like a dream. It started to feel wrong the moment I arrived. The road to the lodge was barely plowed, the snow thick and heavy, like it was trying to swallow the place whole. The trees surrounding the property stood unnaturally still, not even swaying in the wind. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was just unused to the isolation. But something about the way the snow muffled every sound, even my own footsteps, made me feel like I was walking into a tomb. The first few days passed quietly. I kept the place clean, checked the boiler, restocked firewood. I kept the radio on in the background, the only voice I heard for hours at a time. But around the fourth night, something strange started happening. It began with the lights in the main lodge flickering. I checked the fuse box. Nothing wrong. The generator purred like it was brand new. But every time I walked back to the caretaker's cabin, the lodge lights would flicker again. At first I thought it was faulty wiring. Then I noticed they only flickered when I was watching from a distance. The next night I saw someone in the window. Just a glimpse. A silhouette in the second floor lounge, right where the rocking chair faced the fireplace. The chair was empty when I checked earlier. I stared at the figure for a long moment. They didn't move, didn't even turn toward me. I rushed into the lodge, heart pounding, convinced someone had broken in. But the lounge was empty. No footprint, no melted snow near the door, no warmth near the fireplace, just the chair, facing outward like always. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking of that figure, how still it was, how the head tilted just slightly, almost like it had been. The next morning I found the front door to the lodge wide open. Snow had blown into the lobby, covering the rug, but there were no tracks leading in or out. I was sure I had locked it the night before. I checked every room, every corner, but there was nothing. Nothing but the same eerie silence and cold air that now seemed to press against my skin harder than ever before. I started to hear footsteps after that, soft, shuffling sounds above me when I was in the basement checking the furnace, sometimes creaking on the stairs when I was on the ground floor. Each time I rushed to catch whoever it was, the sound would stop, and each time I found nothing. Until the sixth night. That was when I saw the writing on the fogged window pane in the kitchen. Don't stay. It was faint, like a finger had traced the words into the condensation. I stood there staring at it for minutes, not sure whether to laugh or panic. My breath fogged the glass again, and behind the fog, the writing was. I told myself I was cracking, that I was letting the isolation get to me, that I needed to get out first. I drove down to the nearest gas station the next day, nearly an hour away, just to see another human face. When I told the cashier where I was staying, her smile faded. "You're up at Ridgeway?" she asked quietly. "Alone?" I nodded. She didn't say anything after that, just gave me my change and stared until I left. That night, I locked every door and window in the caretaker's cabin. I left the lights on, even though the power flickered again. I tried to ignore the sound of wind scratching against the walls, but then I heard a knock, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I froze. My heart was a thunderstorm in my chest. I crept to the door and looked out the peephole, but there was no one there. Only snow, only the empty porch. I didn't open it, and yet, when I turned around, the firewood I had stacked in the corner was scattered across the floor, the axe embedded in the wall, like someone had thrown it. I slept with my boots on that. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I started packing, but when I went to get my keys, they were gone. I searched every inch of the cabin, checked my jacket pockets, flipped the bed, tore open drawers, nothing. I ran to the truck anyway, desperate. But even before I reached it, I saw what had happened. The tires had been slashed, deep, jagged cuts, almost like claw marks. Snow had drifted over the hood, but I could see something had written in it. "You were warned." I backed away, slipping in the snow, heart racing. When I got back to the lodge, I saw the lounge window again. The figure was there, only this time, it wasn't facing the fireplace. It was looking out directly at me, still unmoving, still shadowed, but watching me. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the maintenance shed behind the caretaker's cabin, where the emergency snowmobile was stored. I didn't care if I froze to death on the way down. I had to leave. The keys were already in the ignition. I didn't even think about how or why. I rode through the snowstorm blindly for hours, until I reached the main road and flagged down a snowplow driver. When I returned with the authorities the next day, the lodge was gone. Not destroyed, not buried, just gone, like it had never been there. No foundation, no signs of demolition, only a clearing surrounded by trees. The caretaker's cabin was gone too. They thought I imagined it all, said I must have hallucinated, said the snow must have confused my memory. But I know what I saw. I know where I stayed. I still have the deep cut on my hand from pulling the axe out of the wall. And sometimes on cold winter nights, I hear a soft knock on my door. Always three, always slow. And when I look out the window, I swear I see the rocking chair across the street, swaying gently in the snow. I've always hated winter, but it wasn't until the night I stayed at the Hollow Pine rest stop that I understood true fear. I was on a long drive home, heading back to my small town after visiting my sister for the holidays. The roads were already slick with freezing rain, and a heavy snowstorm was picking up faster than expected. I should have stayed another night, but I was restless, anxious to get back, craving the familiarity of my own bed. About halfway through the drive, my phone lost reception and the snowfall thickened to the point where visibility dropped to just a few feet. I slowed to a crawl, creeping along the icy highway. That's when I saw the sign, Hollow Pine Rest Stop, 1 mile ahead. It was a name I didn't recognize. I'd driven that route a dozen times and never noticed it before. But I was cold, tense, and exhausted, so I took the exit when it appeared. The rest stop sat off a small forest road. The parking lot was empty, covered in untouched snow, except for a set of faint tire tracks that curved toward one corner and disappeared. The building was a low brick structure, dimly lit, with one flickering overhead light above the main entrance. There were no other cars, no sounds, no wind, just the thick, unnatural silence that snow sometimes brings, the kind that presses down on your chest. I parked near the door and hesitated. Something about the building gave me pause, like it didn't belong there, like it had been placed there by mistake. The windows were darkened, the glass hazy. I figured maybe they hadn't been cleaned in a while, or maybe it was just the cold fogging everything up. But still, I felt this strange, creeping unease in my stomach. I went inside anyway. The main lobby was dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. There was a vending machine in the corner, humming softly, and a wooden bench along the wall. The air was stale and cold, colder than it should have been, like the building itself was holding in a chill that the storm hadn't even caused. There was a bathroom off to the side, and two small hallways labeled Visitor Information and Lounge. I walked toward the lounge thinking I could warm up for a few minutes and maybe wait out the worst of the storm. That's when I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind sneaking in through the cracks, but it was too deliberate, too intentional. Soft voices murmuring in a language, like chanting but slower, more broken, like someone speaking through water. The sound echoed faintly from the hallway to my left, the one labeled Visitor Information. I froze in place, straining to hear. The whispering stopped, and then I heard footsteps, not boots or shoes, bare feet, padding lightly across the tile. I turned toward the hallway, empty, but when I looked down, there were wet footprints leading toward me, human, bare, soaked as if whoever made them had stepped through melting snow or ice water. They stopped just a few feet from where I stood, and then vanished, as though the person who made them had simply disappeared into thin air. I backed away slowly toward the exit, but just before I reached the door, I heard a voice behind. Stay! I didn't look back. I ran outside, my breath fogging in the bitter air. But when I reached my car, my headlights were, my engine was dead. The battery, which had been perfectly fine when I parked, was drained. I turned the key over and over. Nothing. I looked back at the building. All the lights were off now, except for one. A light from a room upstairs, a room I hadn't seen from inside because I was certain the rest stop didn't have a second floor. But from the outside, it was there. a single window glowing faint yellow, and someone standing in it. Their silhouette was still, watching me. I got out of the car and started walking, not driving, walking down the forest road, desperate to get away from them. My phone still had no signal, and I could barely see the road beneath my feet. The snow kept falling heavier, thicker, blinding me. I stumbled through it, fingers freezing, my boots slipping on ice. I kept walking and walking and walking until I realized something that made my stomach drop. I was back at the rest stop. Somehow, no matter which direction I walked, I circled back. The parking lot was exactly the same. My footprints were the only ones in the snow. My dead car still sat there, and the light was still on in that upstairs window. But now, the door was open, not just cracked, wide open, like it was inviting me back in. I stood there, shivering, afraid to even move. I thought about just staying outside, risking hypothermia. But then I heard the chanting, louder this, echoing across the snow like it was coming from all directions. I stepped backward, and my foot hit something. I turned to look. It was a bundle of cloth, half buried in the... I reached down and pulled a jacket, the exact one she her house. I ran blind, tears, lungs burning. I didn't care where I just wanted to be far from. Eventually, I saw headlights. A snowplow passed by and I waved it down. The driver stopped and pulled me in. I must have looked half frozen. All I could say was, "Please, don't go near that rest stop." The driver looked... What rest stop? I pointed toward the road I'd come from. He shook his head slowly. "There's nothing down that way. Old Fort. That exit's enclosed." I didn't speak another word. Sometimes when it snows heavily, I hear whispering outside my... And sometimes I find footprints, bare one, the snow on leading up to my... It was the winter I moved into the old caretaker's cabin at Larkspur Lake, a remote spot nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but frostbitten trees and a frozen lake that stretched out like a sheet of glass. I'd taken a temporary winter maintenance job at the now-abandoned Larkspur Lodge, once a popular summer retreat, now just a decaying shell. The main lodge was boarded up, and my job was simple: keep the grounds somewhat in order, check on the outbuildings, and report any signs of damage. That's all. I was told I'd be the only one up there. The first week was uneventful. I chopped firewood, monitored the temperature gauges in the generator room, and checked the old cabins that once housed guests. Snow fell constantly, piling in thick waves across the forest floor. I liked the silence at first, the peacefulness of it, the solitude. But the silence didn't stay peaceful for long. It started one night just after midnight. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard a loud knock on the cabin door. Not a gentle tap, a knock, deliberate and heavy. I jolted upright, heart racing, grabbed my flashlight, and slowly opened the door. No one was there, just snowflakes drifting in the dim beam of my flashlight. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. I shut the door and tried to tell myself it was ice shifting, maybe a branch falling. But in my gut, I knew that sound. It had been a knock. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same knock. But this time, when I opened the door, there were footprints, bare, human, leading away from the cabin and into the woods. I followed them with my light, only a few steps in before they just stopped, like whoever, whatever, made them vanished mid-step. The snow was undisturbed beyond that point. It made no sense. I stood there for several minutes, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. The wind was still, the air freezing. When I got back inside, I bolted the door. By the third night, I started hearing whispers from outside. Just before the knock, I'd catch faint voices, murmuring, as though someone were standing just beyond the tree line. I tried to record it once, but the tape came back blank. No sound, no static, nothing at all. I stopped sleeping. The fourth night, I saw something in the woods. A shape, tall, thin, shifting between the trees just beyond my cabin's light. I tried shining my flashlight directly at it, but every time I did, it disappeared. I convinced myself it was shadows, tricks of the snow, maybe a deer. But the shape had a face I couldn't describe. But I remember the eyes, hollow and sunken, glowing faintly like frost, reflecting light. And the mouth. The mouth was open far too wide, like it had been broken at the hinges. I started locking the cabin from the inside during the day, not just at night. That's when the dreams began. I'd wake up cold, drenched in sweat, convinced I'd been outside. In the dream, I'd be standing barefoot on the ice-covered lake, unable to move, and something would crawl toward me from beneath the surface. Long arms scraping beneath the ice, trying to find a way through. Sometimes in the dream, I'd look back at the cabin and see myself standing in the doorway, watching. On the sixth day, I finally radioed the ranger station and told them I was leaving. I couldn't explain why without sounding insane, so I made up a story about bad pipes and losing heat. They didn't argue. I packed my bags before sundown. But when I stepped outside, I found a trail of bare footprints, leading from my door to the lake. They weren't mine. I followed them against every ounce of my better judgment. I just needed to see where they led, to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The trail stopped at the shore, and in the center of the lake, right where my dreams had taken me, I saw it. A figure standing on the ice, watching me. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stared. And even from that distance, I swear I saw its mouth slowly open and open until it wasn't a mouth anymore, but a hole, black and endless. I turned and ran back to the cabin, didn't stop packing until the truck's engine was roaring. I drove down that mountain road like a madman, not caring about the snow, not even about sliding on the ice. I just had to get away. 2 days later, I got a call from the park office. They wanted to know why I'd left the caretaker cabin unlocked, and why there were wet footprints in every room. I hadn't been back inside after I ran. I never left the door open. They said the place looked like someone had been living there. The bed disturbed, dishes used, candles burned down to nothing. But the part that still makes my blood run cold? They found a pair of bare footprints leading onto the ceiling, like something had walked upside down from one end of the cabin to the other. I didn't reply. I just hung up. But some nights, cold nights, I swear I still hear that knock on my front door. Always around midnight, always followed by silence. And every time I check, there are footprints in the snow, barefoot, wet, and waiting. It was supposed to be a quick winter getaway, just me and my girlfriend, Alyssa, renting a secluded cabin up north to escape the chaos of the city. The listing had looked perfect online. A cozy log cabin nestled between tall pine trees, a fireplace, a view of a frozen lake, and total isolation. It sounded romantic, peaceful, a chance to reconnect. The trouble started on the first night. We just settled in, unpacked our things, lit the fire, and cooked dinner. The snow was falling steadily outside, thick flakes tapping softly against the windows. It was exactly what we'd wanted, quiet and still, like the rest of the world didn't exist. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound. It was faint at first, like someone brushing their hand along the outside wall of the cabin, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a tree branch, but then I heard it again, a light scraping, dragging along the wooden exterior, circling the cabin. I sat up, heart pounding, trying not to wake Alyssa. I stared at the window, waiting to see something, anything, but the snow had fogged the glass. I couldn't see a thing outside. Then it stopped. I waited another hour, barely breathing, but it didn't happen again. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, just wind, maybe an animal, and I forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went outside to check. I expected to see animal tracks or signs of a fallen branch. Instead, I found fingerprints, long, smeared prints, like someone had dragged their fingers across every window and wall of the cabin. There were even some near the roofline, far too high for any person to reach without a ladder. Alyssa laughed it off at first. Maybe the last guests were weird, she joked, brushing snow off her coat. But I knew these weren't old marks. The prints were fresh, and there were no footprints, none at all. That night, it got worse. We were sitting by the fireplace playing cards when we heard it. A tap on the glass. We both froze. Then it came again. A tap, 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 deliberate and slow, on the kitchen window. I grabbed the flashlight and rushed outside, heart pounding in my ears. But there was no one there. No prints this time. Just that same thick wall of snow, falling in silence. Alyssa was shaken. She didn't say it, but I could tell by the way she clutched her sweater and refused to let me out of her sight. We double-checked the doors, locked all the windows, and tried to sleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up again, and Alyssa wasn't in bed. I panicked and got up to look for her. The cabin was dim and silent. I searched every room, nothing. Then I heard her voice, outside, faint, distant, calling my name. I opened the front door, and there she was, standing at the edge of the tree line, barefoot in the snow, staring at me, a strange, hollow look on her. I ran to her and pulled her back inside, shouting her name, asking what the hell she was doing. But she didn't answer. She just kept smiling at me, a cold, distant smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and unfamiliar. "They wanted me to come," she said, almost dreamlike. "They're watching us from the trees." I tried to ask her what she meant, but she fell into a deep sleep soon after, and in the morning, she didn't remember any of it. Not going outside, not what she said, nothing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to leave, but the snowstorm had grown worse overnight. The road was impassable, and the power began to flicker. The third night was the worst. Around midnight, I heard it again. The scraping, the tapping, and now whispers. Not from outside from the attic. I didn't even know the cabin had. There was a hatch in the hallway ceiling I hadn't noticed before. I climbed up and opened it, expecting maybe some old junk, some mice, anything rational. But what I found chilled me to my core. Inside were drawings, hundreds of them, scribbled in charcoal on the walls, faceless figures standing in trees, hands pressed against windows, eyes without pupils. Some of them were drawn upside down, Some were scratched into the wood, deep enough to splinter. In the far corner of the attic, there was something else. A crude doll, handmade out of sticks and twine, wrapped in what looked like dried hair, and it was sitting on a wooden box filled with old Polaroid images of people standing outside the cabin at night, all taken from the inside. The last photo was of me and Alyssa, taken through our bedroom window. I didn't tell her what I'd found. I just packed our bags and told her we had to leave, storm or not. But when we tried to drive, the road was gone, swallowed by snow, deeper than it should have been, almost unnatural. We were trapped, and that night, I caught Alyssa trying to go outside again, eyes glassy, feet bare. I had to lock the doors and stay awake all night just to keep her inside. The next morning, she was back to normal again, confused and terrified. When I told her what had happened, we didn't sleep again. We just waited. 5 more days until the snowplows reached the main road and we flagged down a rescue. We never told them the full story. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night sweating, convinced I hear tapping on the windows again. Sometimes Alyssa talks in her sleep, whispering in that same distant voice. And once, I caught her standing at the bedroom window, just smiling at the trees. We've never gone back to that cabin, but whatever was in those woods, I don't think it ever really let us go. I took the winter caretaker job out of desperation. It was either that or continue rotting in my one-bedroom apartment with bills stacking up and no end in sight. The listing was simple: maintain a small private ski lodge in the mountains while the owners were overseas. They just needed someone to keep the place from freezing over, shovel snow, and check the pipes now and then. Easy work, quiet place, decent pay. What could go wrong? The lodge was a massive wooden structure, isolated at the end of a narrow, snow-covered road, surrounded by dense forest. No neighbors, no cell service, and only a static-filled radio to call the nearby ranger station if something serious happened. But honestly, I welcomed the solitude. I thought I needed the silence to clear my head. The first few nights were peaceful. I spent my time reading by the fire, making hot meals, and watching the snow fall through the tall lodge windows. But it didn't take long for the silence to shift. Not louder, but heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. It started with small things: doors creaking open after I'd closed them, lights flickering even after I replaced the bulbs, footsteps echoing from the second floor when I knew no one was up there. I told myself it was just my imagination or the cold playing tricks on the old building, until the night I heard breathing. I was in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard it, low, steady breathing, just on the other side of my bedroom door. I froze, heart racing. I didn't move for what felt like an hour, just listening. But when I finally opened the door, no one was there. I tried to laugh it off the next morning. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I was just on edge. But then I noticed the footprints in the hallway, faint, wet outlines, leading away from my door and disappearing down the stairs. That's when I started checking every door and window every night, locking everything twice. I even started sleeping with a heavy fireplace poker by my bed. But nothing could prepare me for what I found on the 5th night. I was doing my usual round through the lodge when I noticed something strange in the main lounge. One of the heavy velvet curtains was drawn back, revealing a large bay window. That wouldn't have bothered me, except I'd closed all of them the night before. And on the window pane, there was a handprint, pressed into the condensation, large, distorted, as if someone had stood there for a long time watching me. I rushed outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the snow for tracks. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry, just thick snow and darkness pressing in from the forest. I decided to stay up that night, determined to catch whoever or whatever was messing with. I sat in the lounge, staring at the window, poker in hand, coffee keeping me wired. Around 3 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply, far colder than it had been all week. I could see my breath in the air, even with the fire going. And then I heard it again, breathing. Not from the hallway, this in the fireplace. I inched closer, heart pounding, feeling a chill creep over my skin. I could swear I heard whispers, that crackling, murmurs that didn't belong to any language I knew. And in the flicker of the flames, the briefest second, I saw a face, pressed against the inside of the fireplace, watching me from the dark behind the fire. I backed away in terror, knocking over the poker. The face vanished as quickly as it appeared. I thought I'd lost my mind. I even considered leaving that very night, driving through the storm if I had to. But I stayed. The next night, I boarded up the fireplace entirely and locked myself in the bedroom. I didn't sleep, just lay in bed, twitching at every sound, eyes wide in the dark. Sometime before dawn, the lodge groaned. Not the usual creaks from settling wood. This was deep, thunderous, like something huge had shifted inside the walls. And then the floorboards moved under my feet, subtly but undeniably. like the house was breathing beneath me. The next day, I packed my things. Screw the job, screw the paycheck. I was done. But before I left, I noticed something on the second floor. A narrow door in the hallway that I swear hadn't been there before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a short staircase leading downward. A basement, hidden in a building with no mention of the one in the plans I'd been given. I should have left it. I know that now. But I had to. The stairs led to a cold, windowless stone room. In the center was a wooden chair facing the wall. And on the wall, carved in jagged, erratic letters, was a single sentence: the lodge feed. There were stains on the floor, old, dark, dried. Something foul hung and beneath the chair on bone. Human bones gnawed and cracked. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town and handed the keys to the local sheriff. I told him. He nodded silently, said he'd. But I knew from his eyes that I wasn't the first to come running out, and probably not the last. The owners never contacted me again. I never got paid. The lodge still stands, stood again, waiting for the next desperate caretaker. Sometimes I wonder if they ever boarded up the fireplace again, or if someone else is sitting there now, listening to the breathing behind the walls, wondering if the lodge has finally decided it's time to feed again. I grew up in a small mountain town where winters lasted longer than sanity. When I was 17, I got a part-time job delivering groceries to elderly folks and shut-ins who couldn't make it out in the snow. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something to do and a few bucks in my pocket. Most of my deliveries were uneventful, except for the night I went to the Whitaker house. The Whitaker place sat at the far end of Old Birch Road, a steep, winding stretch that was barely plowed even in the best conditions. Everyone in town had a story about the house. It had been vacant for years after Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker died in a fire that gutted the second floor. Some said the fire was suspicious. Others whispered about strange things that happened afterward, shadows seen in the windows, noises in the dead of night, things moving on their own. But the town never tore it down, and for reasons no one could explain, it always stayed just intact enough to survive another winter. That night, my boss handed me a sealed cardboard box. No receipt, no name. Just a yellow sticky note with the address, Whitaker House. Deliver at 7 p.m. sharp. Do not leave on porch. Hand off in person. I laughed at first, thinking it was a prank. But my boss looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just do it, and don't ask questions." I should have walked away. I should have said no, but I didn't. It had started snowing by the time I reached Old Birch Road. My tires skidded more than once, and the house loomed ahead like a black wound in the white landscape. The windows were dark, the roof heavy with snow, and the porch creaked under my boots like it hadn't seen a soul in years. I knocked once. Nothing. Knocked again. The door opened by itself. No wind, no movement behind it. Just the slow groan of ancient hinges and a cold breath of air leaking from within. "Hello?" I called, stepping into the threshold. The air inside was still. Not dead, but watchful, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A shuffle from upstairs. Slow, dragging. I should have left the box, but something, maybe fear, maybe foolishness, pulled me inside. "Delivery!" I shouted again. "Hello?" The sound stopped, and then from the top of the staircase, a figure appeared. It was a woman, tall, thin, wrapped in layers of moth-eaten fabric like a cocoon. Her face was pale, eyes wide and sunken, her hair long and brittle. She didn't speak, just reached out one trembling hand. I stepped closer and handed her the box. She took it without a word, fingers bone-thin and cold as ice. And then she smiled, not warmly, not kindly, just an unnatural curl of lips that didn't quite fit her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I turned to leave, but just before I stepped back out into the snow, I heard a sound behind me, the box tearing open, and then a low, wet gurgle. I looked back, and what I saw, I still don't understand. The woman had dropped the box, its contents spilled on the floor, raw meat, human flesh, blood pooling into the wood grain. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring straight at me, eyes black as holes, mouth wide open, far too wide, jaw unhinged like a broken puppet. And from deeper in the house, something else answered her, a second voice, a wet, hungry growl rising from the basement. I didn't see what it was. I didn't want to. I bolted, slipping and falling on the icy porch, scrambling back to my car like a terrified animal. I never went back. I quit the job the next day. My boss never asked why, just nodded like he already knew. A week later, the Whitaker house burned again. No firefighters showed up. The blaze went out on its own, as if the house had devoured itself from the inside. When the ashes cooled, the foundation was still there, blackened and cracked, but intact. No bodies were, no records of a delivery, no woman, nothing. Sometimes I still dream of her, that smile, those eyes, and that last sound I heard before I ran, a whisper echoing from the darkness. just loud enough to chase me. Next time, stay. I used to work the night shift at a remote gas station just off a forgotten stretch of highway, the kind of place nobody stops at unless they're lost or running low on fuel. In the summer, it wasn't so bad. Long nights, bored truckers, weird conversations. But in winter? Winter turned that place into something else entirely. It was surrounded by woods, endless pine trees buried in thick snow, no houses nearby, no cell towers, barely any reception. On clear nights, you could see the stars, but most nights were just black sky and howling wind. I started noticing things around mid-December. The snowplows hadn't come for days, and the roads were barely drivable. I was alone on shift one night, as usual, sipping bad coffee and flipping through a paperback novel, when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the wind again, but then I heard footsteps crunching through the snow. Slow, heavy. I looked out the window. No one was there. Then the motion sensor light flicked on. Still no one. I stepped outside, thinking maybe someone needed help. "Hello?" I called into the cold. Nothing. I walked around the building. The snow was untouched. No footprints, no sign of life at all. I was halfway around when I heard the beeping chime of the front door opening. I rushed back, heart hammering. The store was empty. The lights flickered once. Then the coffee machine hissed and shut off on its own. I told myself it was just faulty wiring. Maybe I was spooking myself. But then I saw something on the security monitor. A shape at pump 3. A tall figure standing motionless in the snow, just beyond the camera's clarity. No vehicle, just standing. I blinked, looked again. It was gone. The next few nights, the figure kept returning, always in the distance. Sometimes at pump 3, sometimes near the edge of the wood. Always standing, always watching, never coming inside. I started keeping a bat behind the counter. I tried calling the sheriff's office, but the radio only crackled with static every time I mentioned the gas station's coordinates. I knew I wasn't hallucinating. A customer even saw it once and asked me if I had a mannequin out. I told him no. He didn't say another word. He just left his chips on the counter and drove off without paying. The worst night was a week before Christmas. It had started snowing hard. Thick, heavy flakes, the kind that swallows sound. I hadn't seen a car in hours. Just after midnight, the power went out. The backup generator kicked in, but only partially, enough to keep the emergency lights glowing a sickly orange. Then came the knocking. Not at the door, at the glass window behind the counter, the one that faced the woods. I turned slowly. There was a face pressed against the glass, pale, expressionless, eyes wide open, no pupils, just solid white orbs, staring straight at me. The skin was stretched and cracked, like old parchment. The mouth slowly opened, too wide, revealing rows of teeth. Not sharp, just too many, more than any human should have. I stumbled back, knocking over a shelf of snacks. By the time I scrambled to my feet, the window was empty. I didn't go outside. I didn't move until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I dared to peek out. No tracks, no damage, just undisturbed snow and a faint imprint on the fogged glass where the face had been. I tried quitting the next day, but my boss just chuckled. "Gas stations get weird at night," he said. "You'll get used to it." I never did. A few days later, a trucker came in looking pale and shaken. He said his rig stalled near the station last night. He swore something was watching him the tree line the entire time he was fixing his engine. He said it whispered his name, said it didn't have a mouth, but still whispered. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers. Eventually, I stopped showing up. I packed my things and moved 2 towns over. But sometimes, when it snows hard and the wind is just right, I swear I still hear that beeping chime, and I get this overwhelming sense that something is standing just outside my window, watching, waiting for me to come back. It happened the winter I moved into my first apartment alone. I was 24, recently out of a toxic relationship, and desperate to carve out a little peace for myself. The apartment was small, just a studio on the top floor of an old building on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that creaked when you breathed too hard and smelled like dust, peeling paint. But it was mine, and that was enough. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked slowly, tried to adjust to the quiet, and ignored the strange noises, the old pipes groaning, the walls cracking with the cold. But then, something began to feel off. It started with the hallway light just outside my door. It would flicker violently every time I walked past it. Not like an old bulb dying, but like it was reacting. It didn't want me there. Then came the footsteps. I'd hear them late at night, always around 2 or 3 a.m., slow, deliberate steps moving down the hallway. At first, I thought it was just my neighbor across the hall, but when I asked the landlord about it, he looked confused. "That unit's been empty for over a year," he said. "No one's supposed to be there." I asked him to check it out, and he did, keys in hand, unlocking the door, while I stood behind him holding my breath. The apartment was gutted. No furniture, no carpet, just cold, empty space and dust-covered floorboard. That should have been enough to make me leave, but I didn't. I told myself it was just an old building, that I was imagining. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of my front door unlocking. I shot up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the handle. It didn't move. The door didn't open, but I know what I heard. That faint, metallic click, as if a key had turned in the lock. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in bed until sunrise, staring at the door. The next night, it happened again. Only this time, I heard something else. Breathing. Soft, shallow, just beyond the door. I called the police. They came, checked everything, but found no signs of forced entry. They told me it was probably stress or sleep paralysis, but I wasn't dreaming. I knew I wasn't. I started noticing other things too. Strange smells like old smoke or rotting leaves wafting through the vents, cold spots in the room, even with the heater on full blast. My belongings would move, not dramatically, but just enough to unsettle me. A photo frame turned face down, a cup in a different cabinet. The bathroom mirror fogged up with strange handprints, too large, too long. I even recorded audio one night, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I left my phone on the table and went to sleep. When I played it back in the morning, I almost dropped the phone. There were hours of silence. Then, at exactly 3:11 a.m., the recording picked up footsteps inside my apartment. Not in the hallway, inside. Soft taps on the floor, slow and deliberate. Then came the sound of whispering, close to the microphone, so faint it was nearly inaudible. I replayed it 100 times, straining to make it out. I still don't know what it said, but the tone chilled me. Pleading, angry, not fully human. The next night was the last straw. I woke to the sound of something crawling across my ceiling. I didn't look up at first. I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. But then, something fell from the ceiling and hit the floor beside my bed. A dark, wet clump of what looked like hair, coarse and matted. I scrambled out of bed and flicked on every light in the apartment. Nothing on the ceiling. No hole, no damage, nothing that explained what had happened. I left that morning, packed what I could, and never went. I don't know what was in that apartment. If it was a spirit, a presence, or just something that was never supposed to be there in the first place. But I know this. It wanted to be seen, and the longer I stayed, the more it revealed itself. Sometimes I still hear the whispers in my dreams. Sometimes I still feel that cold breath on the back of my neck when I'm alone in a room. And every now and then, I wake up at 3:11 a.m. for no reason at all. There's something about old cabins in winter that makes silence feel heavier. Maybe it's the way snow absorbs sound or how the cold seems to press against your skin like a weight. Either way, when I agreed to house sit for my cousin's cabin deep in the woods, I didn't expect the silence to feel like it was watching me. The place wasn't huge, just 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a fireplace. He used it mostly for hunting trips or weekend getaways, but he was heading out of the country for a month and asked if I could stay to make sure the pipes didn't freeze. I figured it would be a peaceful break from city noise. I didn't realize peace could turn into something terrifying so fast. It started snowing hard the first night, the kind of snowfall that turns everything outside into a white void. I couldn't see the trees past the porch. It was as if the world ended just a few feet beyond the door. I lit the fire and settled in with a book, but something about the cabin felt off. I kept hearing creaks in the floorboards upstairs, except there wasn't an upstairs. The roof was just low rafters and beams. I tried to ignore it, blamed it on the wind. But then I noticed something strange near the fireplace. A tiny handprint in the soot on the hearth. Not like a child's handprint. Smaller, too small, and elongated with strange spacing between the fingers. I wiped it off, telling myself I'd accidentally smudged it while tending the fire. But the next morning it was back, fresh, as if it had been pressed there while I slept. Then came the tapping. Not at the door. Not at the windows. From inside the walls. It wasn't constant, just soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on wood. It moved too. Sometimes near the bedroom, sometimes under the floor. I started losing sleep. I'd stay up with a flashlight, walking around the cabin, listening, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. But every time I got close, the sound would stop. On the fourth night, I woke up to the fire completely out. The room was freezing. I got up to relight it and noticed something that made my stomach twitch. Tiny footprints in the ash in front of the fireplace. They led away from the hearth toward my bed. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed bundled in a chair with the lights on, watching the fire. But just after 3 a.m., the flames flickered violently, and the room filled with the sharp stench of rotting meat. The tapping started again, louder now, faster, and it felt like it was coming from all around me, inside the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I backed into the corner, and that's when I saw it, something skittering across the ceiling rafter, pale and thin with long limbs and that same tiny hand. It had left in the soot. I couldn't see its face, just the outline, but I'll never forget the way it moved, like it didn't have bones, gliding more than crawling. I bolted for the door and ran barefoot into the snow. I didn't stop until I was nearly 2 miles down the road, freezing and panicked, where I flagged down a passing snowplow. The driver looked at me like I was insane. I never went back to that cabin. My cousin sold it a few weeks later, claiming he wanted to upgrade. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't want him to think I was crazy, but I know I wasn't imagining. That thing wasn't a raccoon in the walls. It wasn't a trick of the firelight. It lived in that cabin. It waited in the walls, and it was getting bolder. I never thought a job as simple as shoveling snow could lead to something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. That winter, I had picked up some extra work, clearing driveways and sidewalks in the outer suburbs, quiet neighborhoods tucked away near the edge of the forest line. Most of the homes were large, old, and half buried in snow by the time I showed up in the early mornings. People usually left me a thermos of coffee or a few extra bucks as thanks. There was this one house that always stood out, a big Victorian-style place with frost-covered windows and peeling white paint. I had been hired by a woman named Mrs. Carrow who lived there alone. She'd leave my payment in a small tin box nailed to the porch post, always with a handwritten note that smelled faintly of lavender. But I never saw her, not once. Not a glimpse through the window, no footsteps in the snow, no lights on in the house, just silence and that tin box. One morning after a heavy snowstorm, I arrived to find something odd. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. There were no tracks leading up to it, just mine. I hesitated. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about closing it, but something about it gave me pause. The air felt wrong, thicker, like something was holding its breath. Still, I stepped up onto the porch to shut it. As I reached for the knob, I noticed a second note had been placed beside the usual payment. This one scrawled hastily and shaking, the ink smudged, "Don't let it out." My hand froze on the doorknob. The door creaked open a little further, just enough to reveal the hallway inside. Dark, dust-covered, and cold, far colder than outside. Something about the way the shadows pooled in that hallway made my stomach churn. I stepped back quickly and slammed the door shut, heart pounding, and ran straight to my truck. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like something had been standing just out of sight, waiting behind that door. The next day, when I returned, the house looked different. The curtains were torn, the tin box was gone, and now there were footprints in the snow. Not mine, not hers, but large, irregular, dragging footprints that trailed around the house in circles. I followed them with my eyes and noticed they weren't just around the house. They came from inside, out the front door. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. They investigated but found nothing. No signs of Mrs. Carrow. No signs of struggle. The house was empty and freezing inside, as if no one had lived there for months. But I knew better. I had the notes. I had the footprints. That night, I couldn't. The wind howled louder than usual, rattling my windows like something was trying to get in. Just after midnight, I heard the sound of crunching snow outside, slow, dragging steps moving across my yard. I pulled the curtain back, and there, standing by the end of my driveway, was a tall, hunched figure, too thin, its face obscured by shadow, just standing there, staring at my house. Its head jerked suddenly, as if it heard me, and then it started walking toward my door. I grabbed my keys and fled through the back door, driving until sunrise. I didn't go home for 3 days. When I finally returned, nothing had been stolen, nothing broken, but in the snow on my front porch was a single line of writing, carved deep and jagged. "You let it out." I don't take snow clearing jobs anymore. I moved 3 towns over, changed my number, stopped talking about that house. But sometimes, on especially quiet winter nights, I swear I hear something dragging its feet in the snow outside my new house. And I don't look out the window anymore because I know if I do, it'll be standing there, waiting for me to open the door again. It was supposed to be a quiet winter getaway, a weekend to reset, to breathe, to forget the stress that had been swallowing me whole for months. I booked a secluded rental cabin on a hillside deep in the North Country, surrounded by frozen pine forests and endless white fields. No neighbors, no cell signal, just me, a few books, and the sound of snow crunching under my boots. The first night was peaceful. I lit a fire, made some tea, and sat by the window watching the snow fall in slow, quiet waves. The cabin was cozy, warm, and just remote enough to make me feel like I had escaped the world. But that feeling didn't last long. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up suddenly. Not from a dream, not from a noise. Just that awful feeling of being watched. The kind that makes your skin tighten, like something unseen is hovering inches away. I sat up in bed listening, and then I heard it, a soft knock. 3 gentle taps on the front door. I held my breath. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of the night in a snowstorm, miles from the nearest road? I got up, heart hammering, and slowly peeked through the frosted peephole. Nothing, no one, just empty snow and trees. But when I opened the door to check, I saw it, a single footprint in the snow, right in front of the porch. Just one, bare, human. No matching print, no path leading to a lone, perfect print, and nothing else. I shut the door and locked every bolt. The next day, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was old. Maybe some animal had stepped oddly and melted them. I went snowshoeing, made a fire, and tried to ignore the cold unease in my gut. But that night, it returned. Another knock, same time. This time, I didn't look. But when I woke the next morning, there were two footprints in the snow. Perfect, bare, side by side. I should have packed and gone. But I kept rationalizing, maybe a prank? Maybe something explainable? The third night, it didn't knock. It scratched. Long, slow scratches across the front door. Fingernails on. I stood frozen behind the door, holding a fireplace poker, listening to the sound of whatever was outside tracing lines into the wood grain, almost gently, as if it were caressing it. I yelled. I screamed. I even opened the door, poker raised, and again, nothing. Empty, white landscape. But now, there were three footprints. I hadn't slept in days by the time the fourth night arrived. I stayed up, barricading myself inside the cabin, fire burning high, eyes on every window. Just before 2 a.m., I heard something move on the roof, a faint creaking, something dragging itself over the shingles above my head. I ran to the fireplace and shoved more wood in, desperate for light, for warmth, for anything human. That's when I heard the whisper. It didn't come from outside, it came from inside the walls. A low voice close, whispering a name I hadn't heard in years, my own name. I ran, I didn't pack, I didn't grab anything. I sprinted through the snow, down the long hill in pitch darkness, with nothing but a headlamp and my shaking breath. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, flagged down a passing plow truck, and begged the driver to take me anywhere. I never returned to that cabin. When I called the rental agency, they told me something strange. There was no record of a cabin booked under my name for those dates. They said the property had been unlisted for nearly a year, ever since the last renter went missing. The caretaker had found 4 bare footprints in the snow outside the front door. Just 4. No trail, no explanation. I don't know what I let near me those. I don't know what it wants. But sometimes, when I lie awake during winter storms, I swear I hear it again. A soft scratch at the door, and the faintest whisper of my. There's something about winter nights in a hospital that feels colder than any snowstorm outside. I used to work as a night shift custodian at a small town hospital tucked away near the mountain pass. The building was old, a mishmash of new wings and crumbling original structures patched together over decades. Most people avoided the east wing, where the oldest rooms stood empty, dusty, and forgotten, behind rusted doors. But I had keys to every corner of that place, and I knew the hospital better than it. One night, during a brutal blizzard, the power flickered and the backup generators kicked in. I remember the emergency lights casting this eerie orange glow through the halls, stretching shadows in strange, unnatural ways. The newer sections stayed warm and humming, but the east wing, it went cold, dead cold. I could see my breath just walking by the corridor. Around 2:30 a.m., the charge nurse, Rosa, radioed me. She sounded unsettled, said a patient was pressing the call button from room 209, which didn't make sense. Room 209 hadn't been used in years. It had been shut down after a fire 2 decades ago. I'd seen it myself. Walls scorched black, floor tiles warped, the ceiling partially collapsed. No one should have been in there. No power, no bed, no call button. Still, I went to check it out. The hallway leading to 209 was dim, unnaturally quiet. The air was so cold it felt heavy in my lungs. When I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door to 209 was open. I swear I had walked past it an hour earlier, and it was locked, just like always. But now the door creaked slightly with the draft, revealing a dark room lit only by the pale reflection of moonlight through a broken window. I stepped inside. The room was still burned, still wrecked, but someone had dragged a hospital bed inside, an old one, the kind we hadn't used in decades. And on the wall, I saw the call button cord swinging gently, as if it had just been pulled. I backed out immediately and radioed Rosa, asking if maybe maintenance had been in there. She said no. I told her about the bed, the call button, the open door. She paused, then said something that chilled me. Room 209. That was the nurses the fire started. The woman who died there. She used to work night shifts too. I didn't respond. I was too focused on the sound I was now hearing from down the hall. Wheels rolling, slowly, steadily. Something was pushing a gurney down the hallway toward me, but I couldn't see anyone. Just the squeak of old wheels, the sound bouncing off the walls. I turned and ran, I didn't stop until I was in the main wing, heart racing, hands shaking, but that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few nights, things got worse. Room 209 kept calling, even when we removed the wiring. Even when the door was rebolted, I'd find footprints on the dusty floor, bare footprints. I'd hear humming, soft, off-key lullabies echoing through the empty halls. Patients started talking about a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform, checking on them late at night. But no one on staff wore anything like that. One night, a patient in ICU coded out of nowhere. When we checked the monitors, someone had entered a DNR order on his chart minutes before, but it was unsigned. No nurse ID, no login trail, just a note left in the system. Let them rest now. The same words written on the plaque outside room 209, the one dedicated to the nurse who died in the fire. I left the job 2 weeks later. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't walk the halls without feeling a cold presence on my back. I still dream about that, about the whispers in the walls, the soft click of heels down linoleum tiles, the ghostly outline of a woman standing in doorways with empty eyes. And every winter night, when the wind howls through my windows and the room gets unnaturally cold, I swear I hear it again, the call button echoing faintly through the dark. 3 short beeps and a voice saying, "Room 209 needs you." I don't talk about that winter much, not because I've forgotten it, but because I remember it too well. It was the kind of cold that makes everything brittle, even your thoughts. I had just taken a short-term security job, covering night shifts at an old, defunct ski resort high in the mountains. The place had been closed down for years due to financial issues, but the owners wanted someone to monitor the property until they figured out what to do with it. I was desperate for money and figured it would be easy. Just me, the snow, and a few empty buildings. The main lodge was still mostly intact. Dusty furniture, cracked wood floors, a massive stone fireplace that didn't work anymore. I stayed in a small security cabin a short walk downhill. My job was to patrol the property every few hours, check for intruders, and make sure pipes hadn't frozen. It was peaceful at first, quiet, isolated. But then the wind changed. One night during a heavy snowfall, I was doing my midnight walk through the main lodge. I had just finished checking the boiler room and was heading back upstairs when I noticed something strange. Wet footprints on the wooden floor, barefoot, human, leading from the entrance all the way toward the old dining room. I stopped. There was no one else on the property. I hadn't seen anyone come in, and yet the footprints were fresh, soaked snow still melting around them. I followed them slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. They led straight to the massive glass doors that looked out over the ski slope. But there was no one there, just snow and trees. The doors were still locked. When I turned around to head back, I felt it, a sudden drop in temperature, like I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath fogged instantly, skin prickled. Then I heard it, laughter, a child's laughter, echoing through the empty lodge, high-pitched, distant, yet close enough to feel like it was coming from right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I left immediately and locked up, heart pounding. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe the building shifting from the cold. But I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I found a snow angel outside the front entrance of the lodge. A perfect, child-sized snow angel, but there were no footprints around it. Nothing to indicate someone had walked there. Just that strange imprint in the snow, as if something had appeared, made it, and vanished. It got worse from there. Every night around 2 a.m., I'd hear the sound of footsteps in the lodge. Furniture would be moved slightly. Windows would fog up from the inside, revealing small handprints on the glass. I once walked into the main hallway and found a row of snowballs, perfectly shaped, lined up in a straight row across the carpet. One night, I stayed in the lodge longer than usual, determined to see if someone was messing with me. I sat near the fireplace, flashlight off, just listening. That's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, standing at the top of the grand staircase. Her dress was old, torn. Her skin looked frostbitten, blue lips, pale cheeks, ice crystals clinging to her hair. She was barefoot, staring directly at me, and she smiled. I stood up, frozen in place, unsure if I was hallucinating. She didn't move. She just tilted her head slightly and said something I'll never forget. "You're not supposed to be here." He doesn't like that. Then something stepped out behind her. I only saw its shape, a tall, twisted figure that loomed in the shadows. I never saw its face, only its long limbs and the sound it made as it dragged its fingers along the railing with a low clicking, like fingernails tapping wood. I ran. I didn't even close the lodge doors behind me. I sprinted down the hill, slipped in the snow, and didn't stop until I locked myself inside the security cab. I stayed there until morning, shaking, shotgun in hand. The next day, I packed my things and left without giving notice. Later, I looked up the resort's history. There had been an avalanche decades ago during a family ski weekend. A child and her father had vanished. Their bodies were never recovered. Locals said the mountain never gave them back. I don't know what I saw, but sometimes, when snow falls late at night and the world is too quiet, I hear that child's laughter again in my dreams, and I wake up to the sound of wet footsteps on my floor, even though I live alone. I used to be one of those people who scoffed at ghost stories, especially the ones about haunted cabins in the woods. I thought they were just made-up tales passed down to scare kids or sell horror movies. That changed last winter during a weekend getaway that I'll never forget, and never forgive myself. My girlfriend Emily had booked us a remote log cabin deep in the northern woods as a surprise for our anniversary. She'd found it online, rustic, isolated, and covered in a soft blanket of snow. It looked charming in the pictures: crackling fireplace, snowy pine trees, a little frozen lake nearby. But when we pulled up, something about it felt wrong. The cabin was old, much older than it looked in the photos. The logs were darkened from time, the windows cracked around the edges, and the front door creaked open like it hadn't been used in years. Still, Emily was excited, and I didn't want to ruin the moment. We unpacked, lit a fire, and tried to enjoy ourselves. That first night was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no forest sounds, no wildlife, just this heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against the windows like a living thing. When I went outside to grab firewood, I could swear I heard something crunching in the snow just beyond the tree line. But every time I turned around, nothing was there, just darkness and trees. Later, as we sat by the fire, I noticed something odd in the corner of the room. There was a small, old rocking chair sitting by itself, angled towards the door. Emily swore it wasn't there earlier. We hadn't moved it, but when I touched it, the wood was warm, as if someone had just been sitting in it. That night, I woke to a loud creaking sound. I thought it was the floorboards at first, until I realized it was the rocking chair, moving slowly back and forth in the corner. I sat up, heart pounding. The fire had gone. The room was freezing. Then I saw it, a faint shape standing near the door, not moving, just staring. It looked like a man, but distorted. His head was tilted too far, like his neck had... His arms hung loosely by his sides, and his feet didn't seem to touch the floor. He just stood there in the dark, swaying with the chair's rhythm. I blinked. He was gone. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want to scare her. But the next morning, she was pale and distant. She said she'd had a horrible night, something about a man watching her from the corner while she slept. We tried to shake it off, but things kept getting worse. Doors opened on their own. The mirror in the bathroom fogged up even when no one had used it, revealing handprints that pressed from the inside. Once, I found Emily's toothbrush jammed deep into the wall, like someone had stabbed it there. But the worst part was what we found in the basement. There was a locked door beneath the cabin, hidden behind a shelf in the pantry. The key was taped under the sink. I don't know what possessed us to open it, but curiosity got the better of us. We went down with flashlight. The air was damp and foul. Mold crept along the stone walls. In the far corner, there was a chair bolted to the ground, rusted chains hanging from the arms. Around it, scattered across the floor, were old bones, animal bones mostly, but not all of them. And scratched into the stone wall, behind the chair, were words written over and over again. "Don't let him out." That night, we tried to leave. We packed everything and got in the car, but the snow had picked up, a whiteout storm, fast and violent. The car slid into a ditch not far from the cabin, and we had no choice but to go back and wait it out until morning. We barely spoke. The cabin felt colder than ever. Even the fire wouldn't stay lit. Around midnight, we heard the rocking chair. This time, we didn't go out to check. Then came the knocking, not at the front door, but from inside the walls. Knock, knock, knock. It moved from room to room, rhythmic, persistent, growing louder and louder. And then the voice came, low, gravelly, inhuman. "Let me out." Emily started crying. I held her close, swearing it wasn't real, that we'd leave in the morning and forget all of that. But I knew we weren't alone anymore. Around 3 a.m., the knocking stopped. Silence returned. We didn't sleep, just sat huddled by the fireplace, waiting for sunrise. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. We left immediately without looking back. But the thing is, I don't think we left it behind. 2 nights after we got home, we heard the rocking chair again, in our apartment. We don't even own one. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that same whisper, soft and cold, seeping from the corners of "Let me out." I never thought a simple delivery job would become the most haunting chapter of my life. It was just supposed to be temporary, a side gig while I figured things out. I worked for a small courier service that handled off-the-grid deliveries to rural areas. No big deal, just long drives, lonely roads, and a few oddball customers. But that winter night, I delivered something I never should have. The order came in late, Unusual, but not unheard of. A package for a cabin deep in the outskirts of a small mountain town, miles from the nearest paved road. The dispatcher just shrugged and told me to make the run. It was a last-minute request, but the client had paid extra for same-day delivery. No details, no return address, just a name I didn't recognize and a set of GPS coordinates scribbled on a yellow slip of paper. I set off right before sundown, snow already starting to fall. The roads were bad, and by the time I reached the turnoff into the forest, visibility had dropped. My headlights barely cut through the swirling white, and the dirt path leading to the cabin was coated in fresh snow, completely untouched. No tire marks, no footprints. It should have struck me as odd, but I just wanted to finish the run and get home. After a tense, slippery drive, I saw the cabin. Small, old, crooked. Its windows were completely dark. No porch light, no smoke from the chimney. But the GPS marked it as the drop location, so I parked, grabbed the box, and made my way to the porch. I knocked twice. No answer. I was about to leave the package on the step when I heard it, a whisper, barely audible. "Bring it in." I froze. The voice hadn't come from behind the door. It came from inside my head. I thought maybe it was the wind or just the cold playing tricks on me. But then the door creaked open, on its own. Not fully, just enough to see the dim shape of a hallway beyond it. "Bring it in," the voice repeated. This time, it echoed through my skull, sharp and urgent. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was stale and freezing. The interior looked abandoned, furniture covered in dusty white sheets, cobwebs in the corners, wallpaper curling from the walls. It didn't feel like anyone had lived there in years. But then something caught my eye. A trail of wet footprints, leading from the front door, deeper into the house. Not mine. Bare feet, small, child-sized. I left the package on the nearest table and turned to leave, but the door was already closed, and the lock clicked shut behind me. I yanked at it, but it wouldn't budge. Then the air changed. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the window panes. The lights, those dim yellow bulbs overhead, began to flicker violently, and I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Whimpering, soft, fragile, from the hallway. I turned slowly, flashlight shaking in my grip, and followed the sound. It led me to a narrow door at the end of the hall. I didn't want to open it, really didn't, but something compelled me. Some invisible pull, like my mind was no longer fully my own. Behind that door was a staircase descending into complete darkness. I don't know why I went down. I don't know what part of me thought it was okay, but I did, step by step, into the freezing dark, until I reached what I can only describe as a room outside time. It was like a basement, but not made of wood or stone. The walls were pulsing, like skin stretched over bone. The floor was covered in frost and ash, and in the center was a circle of melted snow, with the package I had delivered resting in the middle, open now, though I had never opened it. Inside the box was a mirror. But not just any mirror. It was ancient, warped at the edges, and when I looked into it, I didn't see my reflection. I saw a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in the snow. His eyes were black pits. His skin was covered in frostbite, and behind him was something much, much taller. A figure cloaked in shadow and ice, antlers, no face, just a hole where a mouth should be. The boy raised his hand and pointed at me, and then the mirror shattered. The sound was deafening. I screamed and backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The air around me filled with whispers, voices in languages I couldn't understand, some screaming, some laughing, some just repeating my name over and over. I stumbled back up the stairs, nearly crawling, and when I reached the main floor, everything had changed. The house was no longer empty. Every piece of furniture was uncovered. The fireplace roared. Candles lined the hallway, and seated in the corner of the room was a woman, ancient, unmoving, her face twisted into a smile, far too wide for her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, only cold wind, rushing toward me with the force of a storm. I ran. I don't know how I got the door open or how I made it back to the truck. I don't remember the drive. I just remember waking up in my apartment, soaked in sweat, fingernails torn, keys still in my coat pocket. I tried to report it. I went back to the company to ask about the delivery, but they claimed no such order existed. The dispatcher I talked to didn't even remember sending me out that night. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I still see that boy in the mirror in puddles, in glass, in my dreams. Something followed me home, and I'm terrified it's just waiting for me to make the next delivery. Last winter was the coldest I'd ever felt in my life, not just because of the snow or the biting wind, but because of what happened to me that night in the woods. I haven't spoken about it to anyone. I don't even know how to begin without sounding completely insane, but I need to say it before I start forgetting what's real and what's not. It started with a stupid idea. My friend Caleb had a cabin he inherited from his grandfather, buried deep in the northern wilderness. No neighbors, no electricity, no phone signal. He invited a few of us to spend the weekend there, get off the grid, unwind, and reconnect with nature, as he put it. I didn't want to go. I really didn't. But he kept pushing, and eventually, I caved. There were four of us, me, Caleb, his cousin Darren, and our mutual friend Harper. We packed our gear, stocked up on food, and headed out. The first 2 days were fine, quiet, peaceful even. We played cards, cooked over a wood stove, drank a bit, and laughed at how bad we were at being outdoorsy. But by the third night, things started to shift. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard the tapping. I thought it was a branch against the window, but when I looked outside, I saw no wind, no trees near the cabin, just endless white and the dark outline of the woods beyond. The tapping came again, louder this time, rhythmic, like fingernails against glass. I woke Caleb up, but he waved it off, half asleep, telling me it was probably a squirrel or snow shifting on the roof. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just stared out the window, waiting. The next morning, we found footprints in the snow outside the cabin. Bare footprints, human. They circled the cabin several times and stopped beneath the window where I'd heard the tapping, but there were no prints leading to or away from them, just those lonely tracks frozen in place. Darren laughed nervously, said it was probably one of us playing a prank, but I saw the look in his eye. He was scared too. We all were, but no one wanted to admit it. That evening, Harper started acting strange. She'd been quiet all day, but now she was staring out the window with this glassy, faraway look, like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. "They're watching us," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "They're so cold." I tried to ask what she meant, but she just turned and went back to her room, locking the door behind her. Later that night, the tapping came. Every window this time, all at once, like 100 fingers knocking in perfect unison. We all gathered in the main room, clutching whatever we could use as weapons. Fire pokers, knives, even a wooden chair. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We just listened. Then came the whispers, soft and distant at first, carried by the wind, but growing louder until they filled the cabin with a language none of us understood. It sounded like chanting, but warped, echoing from every wall. And then the lights went out. Not that we had much light to begin with, just battery-powered lanterns and candles, but everything went black. Even the fire in the stove died instantly, as if smothered by something. In that silence, I swear I saw shapes moving outside the windows. Not people, not animals. Tall, thin things, hunched and twitching, their limbs too long and crooked. Their eyes glowed pale white in the dark. One of them placed a hand against the glass. Its fingers were long, frostbitten, with jagged nails, and I could see veins pulsing beneath its skin, black, spider-like lines that crawled up its arm. I don't know how long we stayed frozen, like minutes? Hours? It felt like time stopped completely. Then Harper screamed from her room. We ran, kicked the door down, but she was gone. The window was open, snow blowing in. There were no footprints, just a trail of black ice leading into the forest. We searched until dawn, nothing. No sign of her, no blood, no body. Just that creeping sense that we were being watched from every shadow between the trees. Caleb wanted to stay to wait for her. I couldn't. I packed my bag and left before the sun even cleared the horizon. I didn't care how far I had to walk to get back to town. I just knew I had to get out of those woods. The others followed eventually, but none of us have spoken since. Caleb won't answer his phone. Darren moved to another state. Sometimes I still hear that tapping late at night, even though I live in an apartment now, 6 stories off the ground. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I swear I see a pale hand pressing against the window, just for a moment, before fading away. I don't think we were meant to leave that cabin. I think something followed us back. I've lived in my grandfather's old house for the last 4 years. It's perched on the edge of a small frozen lake, deep in a rural part of northern Vermont. He left it to me in his will after he passed away. Everyone in my family warned me not to move in. They never said why, just vague murmurs about bad memories and strange things that happened. I thought they were just being superstitious. I wish I had listened. The house itself is old, wooden, drafty. In the winter, the cold gets inside your bones no matter how many layers you wear. But it's peaceful, quiet, secluded. That's what I liked about it. Until last winter. It started with the scratches. I noticed them one morning on the back door, deep, uneven gouges etched into the wood, as if made by long fingernails or claws. I thought maybe a raccoon or some animal had been trying to get in. I replaced the door. A week later, the new one had the same scratches, this time from the inside. That same night, I heard something strange coming from the lake. It was well past midnight. I'd gone to the kitchen to grab a glass of water when I heard it. A faint humming sound, low and melodic, drifting through the darkness of the frozen lake. I turned off the kitchen light and looked through the window. There was a figure standing on the ice. I could barely make out any details, but they were tall, motionless, wrapped in something long and tattered that dragged across the surface. I stood there frozen, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then, the figure turned toward the house. I slammed the curtain shut and backed away, my heart pounding. When I finally worked up the courage to look again, the figure was gone, but the humming was still there, soft and persistent, like a lullaby sung underwater. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed. It's hard to explain, but it started to feel heavy, like something was always lurking just out of view. My lights flickered constantly. Doors would open on their own. I kept hearing footsteps in the attic, even though I'd never been up there and had the only key. Then came the ice handprints. I found the first one on the living room window. 5 long, wet prints trailing down the glass. They looked like frost at first, but when I touched them, they were wet and freezing, as if someone had just pressed their hand against it from outside, except the prints were on the inside of the glass. Every morning after that, new handprints would appear, in the hallway, on the bathroom mirror, on the fridge door. Sometimes tiny, sometimes huge. They never melted. They just stayed there, like permanent marks left behind by something cold and dead. One night, I woke to a noise in the hallway, whispers, faint and overlapping, like several voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I slowly opened my bedroom door and saw something that still haunts me. There were wet footprints on the floor, leading from the front door toward the basement stairs. The basement door was wide open. I don't even remember opening it in months. I followed the footprints, trembling, holding a flashlight that barely cut through the heavy darkness. When I reached the basement, the air grew colder with every step. The light flickered violently. I swear I heard breathing, not mine, but something low and labored coming from the far end of the room. Then the flashlight died. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. In the pitch black, I felt something brush against my arm. Wet, icy skin. I locked myself and stayed there. The next day, I went to the lake. Something told me to look closer. The ice had cracked in several places, forming long, jagged lines. I approached cautiously and saw something beneath the surface. A face, eyes wide, mouth open in a frozen scream, trapped under the ice. Then I saw another, and another, dozens, all staring upward, distorted by the ice but unmistakably human. I fell back and scrambled away. That night, I packed a bag and left. I've been staying in a motel ever since. I haven't gone back. I don't care what it costs. I'll never step foot in that house again. But some nights, I still hear the humming, and once, just once, I found a wet handprint on my motel mirror. I've never liked winter, not because of the cold or the snow, but because that season reminds me of the night I almost lost my mind. It happened 2 years ago. I was driving through a mountain pass on my way home from a weekend work retreat. Snow had started to fall heavily that afternoon, and visibility dropped to near zero. I should have stayed another night at the lodge, but I was exhausted and desperate to sleep in my own bed. I thought I could beat the storm. Big mistake. About an hour into the drive, I took a detour down a narrow back road that cut through a dense stretch of forest. My GPS insisted it would shave off 20 minutes. Instead, it led me straight into a nightmare. As the snow thickened and my tires struggled to grip the road, I spotted something through the white blur ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes and skidded to a stop just feet from them. It was a woman. She wore a thin white dress, completely out of place in the freezing weather. Her long black hair clung to her face, and her skin was so pale it looked nearly blue. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at me. I rolled down my window slightly and called out, asking if she needed help. No response. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to leave her out there to freeze, so I reluctantly got out of the car, wading through the snow toward her. But by the time I reached the spot where she stood, she was gone. No footprints, no movement, just the howling wind and snow falling around me. I turned back toward my car and saw her standing beside the passenger. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest. I didn't hear her, didn't see her appear. She was just there, still staring blankly. And this time she smiled, slow, unnatural, that stretched her face in a way that didn't feel human. I ran, got into the car, slammed the door, locked it, and peeled out of there as fast as I could, tires slipping and sliding over the icy road. But the nightmare didn't end there. A few miles down the road, my headlights caught another figure standing in the snow. This one was a man, tall, hunched, with frost coating his beard and empty sockets where his eyes should have. I swerved around him, panicking, trying to keep control of the wheel. But every few minutes, another figure appeared. Some stood in the middle of the road, some knelt in the snow, others crawled or dragged themselves through the white, their faces gaunt and frozen, their limbs twisted unnaturally. I tried turning around. My GPS had stopped working completely. The screen was black, flickering with static. I was completely lost, surrounded by nothing but trees and snow and them. The worst part was I could see them in the trees now, dozens of them, watching. Some pressed their faces against the glass as I drove slowly, their breath fogging my windows, even though they were outside. Others ran alongside my car on all fours, their fingers clawing at the snow like animals. Eventually, I saw lights ahead, a small roadside diner. I didn't care if it was closed or abandoned. I just needed to be near people, under a roof, somewhere, safe. The moment I pulled into the lot and killed the engine, everything went dead. Lights, radio, engine, total silence. I ran inside. The place was lit with old yellow bulbs, warm and welcoming. A man behind the counter looked up and gave me a nod like nothing was wrong. I blurted everything out. What I saw, the people, the woman in the snow. He just stared at me and said something I'll never forget. "You made it out, huh?" he said. "Most folks who take that road don't." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head. "They call it the Whispering Pass around here. Every winter it takes a few souls. Some say they're the ones who froze to death on that road years ago. Now they try to bring others with." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the diner until morning, too afraid to leave. When the snow cleared, I drove home, taking a completely different route. I've never used that road again. But lately, I've been hearing whispers outside my window at night. And sometimes, when I glance in my rearview mirror, I catch glimpses of her again, that pale woman in white, sitting silently in my back seat. I haven't told anyone this story before. Not my wife, not my therapist, not even my brother who was there that night. I don't think I've kept it inside out of fear. I've kept it inside because some things aren't meant to be remembered. Some things change you just by speaking them aloud. But now that winter has come again and the nights have grown darker and longer, I've started dreaming about that night, that cold, endless winter night when time stopped and the world turned into something it wasn't supposed to be. It happened at my family's old hunting cabin. It's deep in the woods, about 30 miles from the nearest town. We used to go there every winter for a weekend of peace, wood fires, and isolation. The cabin is old, really old. My grandfather built it before I was born, and he always warned us to respect the forest around it. He never said what that meant. I figured it was just one of those old superstitions passed down through generations. That particular winter, it was just me and my brother Adam. We planned to stay 2 nights. Snow was already falling when we arrived, but we weren't worried. We had supplies, plenty of firewood, and a generator. The first night was normal. We played cards, drank a little whiskey, and sat by the fire listening to the wind whistle through the trees. But the second night, everything went wrong. It started with a noise on the roof, a dull, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the shingles. Adam thought it was a tree branch. I thought it sounded more like footsteps. We went outside to check, but the snow had completely buried any tracks, and the roof was too steep to climb in the dark. We went back in, shrugged it off. But then the generator died. We weren't too concerned at first. We had backup lanterns and plenty of blankets. But the temperature dropped fast, far faster than it should have. Within an hour, our breath was visible indoors. The fire barely gave off heat anymore, and that's when we heard it again. The dragging sound, now moving across the attic floor. Except our cabin didn't have an attic. We froze. I looked at Adam, and he looked at me, both of us trying to rationalize what we'd heard. But deep down, I think we knew. Something was up there, something that didn't belong. We tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. The latch was frozen solid on the inside. That's when the scratching started. It came from behind the walls, sharp, frantic, like nails scraping wood. Then it began echoing around us, inside the fireplace, under the floorboards, even from the kitchen cabinets. And then we heard whispers, low and choppy, like breath caught in frozen lungs. Adam grabbed the axe by the fireplace and smashed one of the windows. We were ready to run for it, but as soon as he broke the glass, a gust of wind burst through the cabin, howling like a scream, and every candle and lantern died at once. We were plunged into darkness. Something stepped into the room. I couldn't see it. I couldn't even describe it if I tried. I just remember a presence, wrong, unnatural. The air turned heavy, suffocating, and the cold. It wasn't just physical anymore. It felt like it was inside us, freezing our thoughts, slowing our hearts. Adam screamed. I turned and saw him being dragged backward, his legs clawing at the floor, his eyes wide with terror. He vanished into the hallway, and then the whispering stopped. I called for him. No answer. I ran after him. But the hallway had changed. It was longer, twisted, the walls now covered in black ice. The cabin was warping, reshaping itself. I swear I walked for miles through that corridor, but never found the end. Eventually, I came upon a door. It hadn't been there before. I opened it and stepped outside. Just like that, I was back at the front of the cabin. It was morning. The snow had stopped. The broken window was gone. Everything looked normal, except Adam was missing. I searched for hours, calling his name, circling the cabin over and over. No tracks, no signs of struggle. It was like he'd never been there. When I went to report it to the local authorities, they searched too. But they found nothing. No signs of foul play, no trace of him at all. They said maybe he wandered off and froze in the storm, but I know better. Because weeks later, when I returned to the cabin to collect some of our belongings, I found something wedged behind the fireplace. Adam's watch, frozen solid, covered in frost. The hands had stopped ticking at 3:11 a.m., the exact time I'd lost him. And there was something else, etched into the wood beam beside it. A symbol I'd never seen before. 3 jagged lines intersecting in a spiral, almost like a twisted snowflake. Now, every winter, I hear noises in my house, scratches behind the walls, whispering in the vents, and sometimes I find frost on the mirror, even when the heat is on full blast. Something followed me back from that cabin, and I know it's still waiting.